Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Out of Place and Out of Sorts, written by Serendipities_stock_exchange. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin Chapter 1, A Hero's Broken Record. If there was one thing that Izuku Midoriya had learned, it was that part of being a hero was being prepared for the unexpected. Between nearly dying multiple times within a few months and being allowed to achieve his dream in quite possibly the most incredible yet grotesque way possible. He swore he could still taste shampoo most days. Izuku tried to mold himself to catch the curved ball that were his life. However, nothing could quite prepare him for the words his teacher, Aizawa Shoyuta, was about to tell him when he was called into the teacher's lounge. Eri has been replaced by an alternate version of herself. The teacher spoke plainly, practically deadpanning. It took a few moments for Izuku to respond, his eyes widening as his jaw dropped as far as it would go. "See, come again." Aizawa sighed. "You best come with me, Midoriya. We'll walk and talk." The teacher slumped off his chair, his movements almost as tired as his expression. "I'm okay." Izuku blustered as he moved to follow his teacher out into the hall. A million questions were bottlenecking in his throat as Aizawa began. "I'll start from the beginning. Eri's quirk has seemingly accidentally triggered." "Seemingly?" Izuku questioned in disbelief. "Yes, seemingly. I wasn't there when it happened. Ask Mirio for those details when we get there," he drawled. Izuku's expression matched the weary tone of paint that lined the hallway walls. He couldn't help but wonder if that was an excuse so that his sensei wouldn't have to explain more than he had to. Izuku respected his teacher but had learned that Eraserhead was not above passing on work that he deemed illogical for himself. "To be honest, Midoriya, I'm not entirely convinced." Aizawa's expression became wearier. "However, I also know Eri isn't one to lie or fake being as out of place and scared as she was. Regardless of what actually happened, something is clearly affecting her." A frown began to form on Izuku's face. He and many others had done so much to make the girl smile. Now, fate seemed to want nothing more than for her to suffer again. "What can I do to help?" he almost shouted. A faint smile passed the teacher's expression, seeing the resolve in his student's eyes. "Well, Midoriya, that's why you're here." He paused outside a small conference room and turned to look directly at Izuku. A somewhat devious smirk adorned his features. "She asked to see you specifically. I won't ruin the surprise. But I'd brace myself if I were you." Izuku didn't know how to feel about the expression he was faced with. He could count the number of times he'd seen his teacher smile on one hand. He didn't know whether to feel frightened or excited that he was about to witness what created that smile. Aizawa moved to open the door, leading him into the room before a loud, childish squeal filled the room. "Papa!" Eri screamed with joy. Izuku first thought that Eri was referring to his teacher. However, that quickly changed when the young child did a great emulation of a football tackle straight into his stomach. "Oof. Hi Eri, wait, what did you just say?" he said as his brain began to catch up with his body. "She wanted to see you so badly, Midoriya. I'm kinda jealous almost." Izuku turned to face the voice of Mirio Togata, noting the ever-present smile on his face, currently looking more like a eating grin. The greenette immediately faced down at the child in his arms. Then to his teacher, then to Mirio again. Each head swivel brought ever-increasing amounts of sweat and panic to his face. "Can someone please explain what's going on?" Mirio proved rather unhelpful in this regard as he leaned forward in his chair, clutching his guts as he heaved with laughter. His teacher was offering only a smirk in response to his personal chaos. It was Eri who spoke first. A mix of relief and anxiety was sewn into her voice. "Papa, I'm so glad you're here. Uncle Mirio and Uncle Aizawa keep telling me weird things, like you being a high school weight. Papa, why are you so short?" She tilted her head to the side. Izuku didn't know how to respond, so his instincts as a human interaction savant took over. "Why are you calling me Papa, Eri?" he exclaimed in perplexed terror. Eri was starkly taken aback by Izuku's response, even going so far as to look hurt by his words, and he immediately regretted it. "Be because you're my papa, don't you know that?" she cried. Izuku desperately tried to make amends, but Aizawa beat him to the punch. "Eri, I hate to say this, but all that weird stuff we told you earlier was the truth. Does this Midoriya look like the same one who adopted you?" Eri gripped tightly onto Izuku's shirt, tears beginning to well up in her eyes as she faced downwards and choked out, "No." Izuku's heart broke seeing the girl in pain like this. His heroic instincts kicked in, kneeling down to her level while placing one hand gently atop her head. "Eri, look at me." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wet with tears streaming down her face. "I may not be the Midoriya that you know, but I'm still a hero who does everything he can to make those in trouble smile. So I promise that I will do everything I can to help you. You're not alone." Izuku took Eri into his arms, giving her a big hug as the girl's sobs began to fade. Izuku pulled back slightly, facing Eri with as big and genuine a smile as he could muster, even going as far as dipping into his training with his all-might face. "I won't force you, Eri, but I'd like to hear about this other me. Would you mind telling me?" Eri shook her head, a smile beginning to show on her again. "My papa is the coolest hero ever. His hero name is Valiant, and he can turn into a big green dragon and breathe fire and fly." "Can you turn into a dragon?" "Dragons are the coolest." The moment Eri spoke, everything she wanted to say about this other him, who had apparently adopted her, came flooding out all at once. "A dragon. No, I can't do that." Wait, Valiant not Deku?" the boy asked, very bewildered. "What's a Deku?" The girl tilted her head to the side. "What's a Deku? What's a Deku? Izuku screamed inside his head. "Can turn into a dragon." Suddenly and utterly losing composure, the influx of information made his eyes glaze over. Not papa, are you okay?" Eri asked, somewhat concerned. Izuku didn't know what to do with himself. He had just learned that there was possibly a version of himself that not only was lucky enough to be born with a quirk but had arguably one of the most prominent quirks one could imagine. Offering strength, durability, versatility, and mobility in one neat package, if Ryukyu was anything to go by. Sure, he wasn't confident whether this other version of himself was real. However, given what he knew about Eri and her quirk, there was still a chance that it was. As far as his self-esteem was concerned, that was enough. To say Izuku was jealous wouldn't be inaccurate, but it would significantly undersell the swirl of emotions he was feeling now. He had never considered the possibility of being the offshoot version of himself that got ed by life. He couldn't stop thinking. Why him? Why wasn't he like Valiant? Why was he Deku? But he couldn't just sit there unresponsive to poor Eri. Shaking his head, he looked towards her. "Wow, your papa sounds really cool, Eri." He tried to be as genuine as he could. Her face lit up again in response. "I know, and my mama is just as cool. She has the same quirk as papa, but she's not as big and doesn't glow green." "Hold on, mama. This other him was with someone on top of everything else." Curiosity got the better of him. Eri. Who is your mama?" The girl's face lit up again as if she just remembered something massively important. "Oh. She's Ryukyu, the dragoon hero. She and papa love each other a lot." Izuku's jaw dropped to the floor. Figuratively, of course, but it had made an impressive attempt. "My other self is in a relationship with Ryukyu, he had to force himself to slow down and think. The number 10 hero in the country. That Ryukyu, and was raising Eri with her." Izuku had never experienced actual indignation before, jealousy, sure. He had many moments where he wished he had a quirk like those around him, especially Kachan's. But it's different when it's another you. A version of yourself that you could have been. Well, at least he still had one for all. Wait. Glow green. No way, it couldn't be. One of the reasons All Might gave him one for all was because he was quirkless. He couldn't have one for all on top of an existing powerful quirk, could he? Curious as he was, Izuku couldn't bring himself to ask for a couple of reasons. 1. To maintain the secret, and 2, he was afraid of the answer. What would it mean? Had all he suffered by being quirkless been for naught? Could Izuku have had it better all along if he simply had a quirk of his own? But just as he thought this, something else struck him. Hold on, I'm still in high school. How is this other me raising a kid with Ryukyu? He looked at everyone around him. Wait a moment. Eri thought UA being a high school was weird. Why? Mirio, done with his laughing a while ago, spoke up. Apparently, where she's from, UA is a university. Also, side note Midoriya, those were some crazy and slightly disturbing faces you were making there. He said with an awkward grin. Izuku dearly hoped that he wasn't mumbling while deep in thought again. Well, regardless, that explains a few things. This Valiant was at least 18 years old, making it not only legally possible to adopt a child but also not illegal to be dating a woman around a decade older than him. But that's still a sizable age gap. How did that relationship even happen? Wait, does that mean Ryukyu is a cougar? Holy CRP. Is the other me dating a cougar? Izuku practically shouted. No. Weren't you listening? Mama is a dragon. Not a cougar. The little girl pouted. Izuku reflexively put a hand over his mouth. Boy, he did not mean to say that out loud in front of Eri. Thank goodness the girl was too innocent to understand what he meant. But directly behind him, he could feel a bone-chilling pressure brushing against his back. Watch that tongue, problem child. The teacher glared. The student could only gulp and nod in response before Mirio piped up again, recovering from a laughing fit. Ha ha ha. Actually, Midoriya. Also, where this Eri comes from, you and Ryukyu are the same age and enrolled at UA. The senior offered placatingly. We're both at UA together. Izuku was shocked, to say the least. Yeah, you Papa and Mama have been together since they were kids. The child chirped. That long. Wait, so where he had no one growing up, his other self had a girlfriend? Are you serious? Izuku was now actively trying to make his mind not turn to his insecurities and prevent having a meltdown, so he looked for something else to focus on. Wait, isn't Eri's quirk associated with time? This other reality sounds like a lot more than a time difference. It's like everything changed. If this is all true, how did Eri's quirk do this? Izuku couldn't wrap his mind around all these discrepancies. So much was different, from people's ages to the nature of this school, that all couldn't be affected by time alone, could it? Aizawa motioned to speak in what could only be described as a dire drawl. To be frank, we aren't sure ourselves. However, Mirio can confirm that Eri's quirk triggered just before this all occurred. Mirio nodded in response. It happened when I showed Eri how to make fart noises with her armpit. The senior grinned. Izuku sighed a little at his senior's behavior. Wait, does that mean Eri can trigger her quirk via her armpits? Kinda like how Uraraka activates hers with her fingers. Wait, no, now is not the time for quirk analysis. Even if that was a trigger, which it likely wasn't, if Eri's quirk triggered again, there is no telling what would happen. So, what do we do now? Izuku asked. Aizawa chimed in again. Well, now that Eri has better accepted her circumstances, Izuku should have figured there was something more to his role when he was brought here. Although this seems a little harsh to be dumping reality on a 7-year-old like this, let alone one with volatile powers like Eri's. Though he assumed his sensei had his reasons. I now have to debate with myself whether or not to contact Ryukyu. The teacher almost sighed out the last part. Come again. Mirio interjected. Contact her. Why? Izuku asked. Sure, Eri saw her as a mother figure, but getting Ryukyu involved with this seemed a bit much. She was the number 10 hero, after all. She had many responsibilities as it was. Because I'm going to see if I can get her to take Eri in. At least for a while. Aizawa definitely sighed this time. What? How? Why? Izuku cried out. For starters, I already explained what, as to how. I have my ways. And finally, why? Because Eri has made it quite clear she isn't comfortable without the presence of who she sees as her parents. It would be cruel of me if I didn't at least try, as illogical a request it is. He groaned. Izuku was still concerned. What about Eri's quirk? She had just lost control again. And before you ask, I'll check in several times a week to ensure everything is okay. The teacher said like he read Izuku's mind. But that's probably not going to be enough, so I'll have to discuss this in length with Mizu later. Izuku still wasn't sold. Wouldn't it be safer to just have Ryukyu visit once in a while? Aizawa deflated. You're not wrong. It would be. But Eri's present state of mind makes it uncomfortable for her to be here. If her quirk triggers again due to stress, that'll only cause more problems, especially if it is capable of what we've seen here. And I can't watch her 24/7 to ensure that doesn't happen. Izuku couldn't help but think. If stress was such a big deal, why were you so harsh earlier? Aizawa made a face, suggesting he could gauge what Izuku was thinking. Sometimes, Midoriya. You have to be HRD on people to save them from later pain I might not be able to prevent if I'm not there. He said as he pointed at his eyes. It's better she learns the truth now. Breaking into their conversation, Eri bounded excitedly, taking in only the parts she cared to listen to. Uncle Aizawa. Does that mean I might get to see Mama? The small girl trilled happily. The teacher nodded, hiding a tiny smile under his capture scarf as he looked at her. Can Pa Midoriya come too? The girl asked excitedly. That depends. Midoriya. Aizawa turned to face his student. Izuku never knew his father that well, outside of the rare visits he'd make on certain holidays due to him being continually overseas for his job, keeping the family supported. Izuku didn't want Eri to know what that was like. She deserved to have some semblance of a father figure in her life. Izuku looked at his teacher's gaze and then turned to face the girl next to him. Only one question on his mind. Would it make you happy to call me Papa, Eri? He asked with a soft yet earnest tone. Yes. The girl shouted. And that was all he needed to hear. Smiling and nodding at Eri, he turned to face his teacher as he nodded again. I'll be there. Izuku said confidently. Concern still plagued the brunette's mind, but if it meant making Eri smile, he'd go the distance. Ryuko Tatsuma was composing a report on a recent arrest in her office. It was unquestionably the dullest feature of her job, but she understood its necessity. She had just returned from stopping a bank robbery by picking up the getaway van in her dragon form and hauling it over to a police station. She was rather proud of that feat, however. After all the excitement, her mind began to revert to the depressive state it had been in recently. As the number 10 hero, Ryukyu, she technically wasn't left wanting. She had respect, resources, power, and privileges as one of the top 10 heroes in the nation. However, deep down, she knew she didn't deserve her position, especially given recent events. It didn't help that she also felt stuck in a rut. She devoted her life to being a great hero and left so little room for anything else in her life. But now she was questioning herself and every decision she'd made. At first, none of this bothered her. Hell, knowing nothing but heroics was even a source of pride. However, it was all beginning to wear on her, leaving her wondering if her approach to life was correct. Night Eye's funeral had been soul-crushing. Various thoughts had hit her all at once. Did she really deserve to call herself a hero? Wasn't there more she could have done? One annoying thought, however, stood out: being 26, single, and never having dated was something Ryuko had learned was suddenly painful to think about. Especially with the ever-impending, big 3-0 steadily coming over the horizon. The most frustrating thing about it was that it further proved her as a failure when all she could think about at a comrade's funeral were her selfish insecurities. Having a midlife crisis at 26 was just absurd. She was a pathetic excuse for a hero. As she got up to get something to drink, her phone rang. Not her office phone, but her personal phone. Ring. This could be an emergency, friends or family checking on her or another med telemarketer. She picked up her phone, looked at the screen, and recognized the name. Eraserhead. She answered her phone immediately. All the heroes on the Hasaikai raid exchanged numbers if emergencies or issues related to the case arose. They were all professional enough to not abuse the trust they'd given each other by making random phone calls. Concern displayed on her face over what this could be about, knowing who he was. The Erasure hero was well known for being all business and very no-nonsense. For him to make a direct call like this that set off some serious alarm bells. "Aizawa, what is it?" she asked in a grave tone. "I need a favor, Tatsuma." The teacher hero responded in an equally heavy tone. Ryuko's brow furrowed. This had to be serious. Her mind raced at the possibilities. Would it be like the Hasaikai? "Do you remember Eri?" Her heart sank. "Oh no, not Eri. What happened to her?" "Yes, the girl we saved from the Yakuza. How could I forget?" Anxiety was beginning to show in her voice. "Good, because I need you to babysit her." "See, come again." Confusion and immense emotional whiplash took the heroine. Aizawa sighed. Why are so many people saying that to me lately? Am I not enunciating properly? No, I heard you. It's just what? Ryuko was not prepared for this, to say the least. Alright, first off. Are you sitting down? Ryuko raised an eyebrow. No. Should I? Probably. He said flatly. Ryuko moved to sit down. Relieved, though curious for an explanation. I hope you understand that I am a busy woman, Aizawa. I can't really be taking in children to care for. She said, somewhat mirthfully. I know, but hear me out. Well, that is why I am sitting down, right? Ryuko smirked, she could practically hear the flat look he was giving her on the other end. There were two ways of dealing with Eraserhead. One was fear and respect, and the other was the patented Ms. Joke's approach. After some initial interaction with Aizawa, she had long since realized she much preferred the latter. As Present Mike and Ms. Joke once said, the man needed to lighten up. There was no reason to nearly give her a heart attack like that. He sighed again. Well, it all started this morning. In the moments to pass, Ryuko would be glad she was sitting down, as she learned once more that part of being a hero was being prepared for the unexpected. Chapter 2, The Dragon, the Boy, and the Little Girl. Ryuko didn't know what to expect when she came to UA today. Well, technically, she did, but she couldn't help but feel emotionally under-equipped for this situation. Walking past the check-in at the big iconic gate and into the main building, anxious was far too inappropriate a term for how she was feeling now. Today she was going to visit Eri, and Aizawa gave Ryuko the decision to take her in or not, which the Dragoon hero appreciated. She had only gotten so many details from Aizawa, but she had heard enough to feel sorry for the girl, at least more so than she already did. Eri had been through so much, despite her age. Even if Ryuko didn't have her reasons for being here, had she dismissed the request, her conscience would never let her live it down. What were her reasons, you may ask? Sympathy and a soft spot for children, for one. Owing Aizawa a favor for another. Convincing UA to let her take her new interns on the raid against the Yakuza required quite a bit of greasing on the wheels, to put it mildly. But she could hardly blame them after everything UA had been through as of late. They had the right to be cautious. Of course, there were other reasons she did this, more personal reasons. But she needed to be sure she was making the right decision. She still held so much uncertainty about any of this. However, if not for her doubts, she may have already taken in Eri. Walking through the empty weekend halls, she found her way to the teacher's lounge. Taking a deep breath, she reached to open the door as it opened by itself. Aizawa stared with a flat expression. "Ah, you're here." Just as she was about to respond, Ryuko heard another voice in the room. "Mama." Her gaze followed the sound of the voice as she laid her eyes on a very familiar and adorable little girl. "Mama!" Eri shouted, springing out of her seat and rushing towards Ryuko. Thankfully for her, being a popular pro-hero who could turn into a freaking dragon meant she had plenty of experience handling a ballistic child missile. Catching the girl in her arms, she greeted her. "Hey there, Eri. I heard you wanted to see me." Her tone was bright and as joyful as she could make it. Looking at the girl now, she didn't know what she was worried about. How could this ever give her anxiety? "Yeah, I did. Wow, Mama, you're taller and pretty." The girl stared in awe. Good grief, this girl is too precious. Ryuko hadn't even been here for 5 minutes, and she was already plenty okay with taking care of Eri for a while. A slight frown came over her face, with another issue coming to mind. Ryuko turned to face Aizawa, a question in her gaze, and he nodded in response. They had both agreed that keeping Eri as happy and not stressed as possible was of the utmost importance, even allowing her to call them whatever she wanted. Even so, there was something she needed to confirm. "Now, Eri. I don't mind you calling me Mama. But you do understand I'm not the same person, right?" She was concerned with what Eri's response might be, but she needed to be sure this child didn't have the wrong idea. Although Ryuko wouldn't mind faking a role for her, despite what issues that might cause. She didn't want to lie to the girl, only for Eri to lose faith in her when the truth inevitably came out later. A little pain now for less ultimately down the road. It was apparently a sentiment that Aizawa shared when he explained the story yesterday. Eri puffed her cheeks dejectedly. "Yes, I know, but I don't know what else to do. It's like I don't know anyone anymore." Ryuko felt awful after that response, so she attempted to make amends and shifted her tone back to something more pleasant. "Now, as I said, I don't mind you calling me Mama. If it makes you happy, that's what matters to me." "Really?" "Yes, Eri, really. You can call me whatever you want so long as it's nothing bad." She smiled. Eri beamed back at her as Ryuko could swear this whole experience would give her diabetes. "So, what were you doing before I got here, Eri?" Ryuko tried to initiate a lighter conversation with the girl. "I was playing with Uncle Mirio and Papa." She pointed to the two boys in the room. Ryuko's gaze followed the girl's finger, and her eyes lay on two familiar sights, Mirio Togata and Izuku Midoriya. "Ah right, Papa." The moment she looked at them, the green-haired boy's face erupted red like a volcano as he suddenly took a great interest in something on the floor. It had been a while since she'd seen them. Togata, not since Nightai's funeral, and for Midoriya, it had been even longer. She didn't have anything against him, but seeing Midoriya after everything Aizawa had explained was awkward, to say the least. Learning about an alternate version of yourself who had a relationship with someone else's alternate self and then having to meet with that said someone and likely having to talk about it. It was not something Ryuko was looking forward to. Where would I even start? She grumbled mentally. It was still something she was trying to wrap her head around, attending UA with a childhood friend who then became her life partner. Imagining herself doing that just felt odd. She never dedicated any significant time outside of heroics during school, let alone romantic pursuits, fictional or otherwise. She had never even had a crush on anyone. Though with how Ryuko was now, she'd be lying if she said there wasn't a hint of jealousy towards her other self for being able to branch out. The woman looked back toward Eri. It wasn't speaking to Midoriya that made her actually concerned, though. What worried Ryuko was the lengths this girl might go to bring them together. As someone with separated parents, she knew how important a bond between parents was to a child. If she was being honest, that was a significant reason she considered taking her in. While that meant she would do much to help Eri, playing house with a high schooler was not on the table. That's great to hear, Eri. What were you playing? Ryuko asked, shifting her mind back to the task at hand. We were playing charades. That sounds like fun. Why don't you go back, and I'll join you in a bit after I speak with Aizawa, okay? Ryuko asked as cutely as possible. She gave a big nod and a smile, then turned to run back to Mirio and Midoriya as Ryuko turned to face Aizawa, whose arms were folded with his eyes looking as bloodshot as ever. How does that man cope with his hours? Hi, by the way. Sorry, had to address the Eri first. She said apologetically. It's fine. It is why you're here, after all. He replied as tiredly as always. How has she been holding up? Good. All things considered, Eri's adjusting rather quickly, and there has been more back and forth of her explaining her world and us explaining ours. He said, looking at the three playing together. Oh, so you believe the story now, huh? Ryuko jabbed. I still have my reservations, but the more I talk with her, the more I can tell she's not the girl I knew, still the same person but with very different experiences. His frown deepened as he sighed. As much as I'd like to sum this up to illness, there is no illness I can find that exactly matches this situation. The only thing I can think of is that there is something we're still missing here. Ryuko interjected with a frown of her own. Even if we can't tell what this is. We agreed that treating Eri like she has a mental problem isn't a great idea. Treating the girl like that would only lead to her feeling ostracized. Right now, their job was to ensure they wouldn't create a situation where Eri would trigger her quirk again without Aizawa being around to prevent it. I know. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. Knowing what happened will make it easier for us to approach this. I'm not adding more to Eri's plate than she can handle. Fair enough. Ryuko nodded. Seeing the even more solemn than usual look on Aizawa's features, Ryuko decided the best course of action was to shift the conversation. Well, was there anything interesting I should know about? She asked while also looking at the three. Aizawa smirked in response. You'll see, go spend time with her. She's wanted to see you for a while now. He said as Ryuko looked slightly miffed at the dismissal. Aizawa leaned against the wall. I'll hang around just in case Eri's quirk triggers again. As he pulled a sleeping bag out of nowhere. Ryuko raised an eyebrow and then nodded at Aizawa, deciding not to question where he was hiding that thing. Steeling herself as it was time to face the music, she turned and walked over to the other three. She noted that Midoriya looked like he was emulating what she could only guess was a monkey. Wait, no, a bull, and now he's breakdancing. Okay, I'm lost. How's the game going, you three? Ryuko asked. Pretty good, I'd say. Though I'm not gonna lie, Midoriya has us pretty stumped on this one. Mirio grinned. Mama, do you know what Papa is supposed to be? Eri asked, scrunching up her face in thought. I'm not sure, to be honest. She said as she turned her gaze back to the green team. The moment Izuku realized who was now watching him, all semblance of control over his dance was lost as he slipped and face-planted onto the floor. Everyone else, except Aizawa, was immediately concerned. Eri shrieked. Papa, are you okay? Mirio winced. Oh, Midoriya, you okay there, buddy? Ryukyu fretted. Are you able to stand? Aizawa scoffed. He's fine. He's been through worse. As much as Izuku knew that was true, he felt pretty insulted by that remark. Pushing himself back up again and scratching his head in embarrassment, he responded. I am fine, everyone. This isn't even in the top 10 of injuries I've had. He said, somewhat dejectedly. He turned to face the looks of concern and gratitude for his well-being. But, when his eyes met those of Ryuko's, his face caught alight once more as he turned his head back to the ground. It didn't take much for Ryuko to understand why. After all, if she was having issues talking about their otherworldly relationship, then it must have been dreadful for him. Sigh, we're going to have to address that soon, aren't we? She stifled a groan. She couldn't place exactly why, but something about seeing Midoriya right now was frustrating her. She could guess why, but it was not like her newfound knowledge of the other Ryuko was his fault. She can't allow herself to blame him like this. To do so would be very unbecoming. So, what exactly were you trying to be, Midoriya? Ryuko asked. Trying to fight through his embarrassment, Izuku stammered. I was trying to be a classmate of mine, Emina Ashido. Mirio spoke up, a light bulb practically visible above his head. Oh right, the pink girl with horns. Now those bullhorn gestures make sense. Oh, Auntie Mina, right, yeah. She loves break dancing. Eri had also connected the dots. Mina Ashido, that's the one with the acid quirk, right? Ryuko asked, uncertain if she remembered correctly from the sports festival. Yeah, she's Mama's best friend. Eri chirped. She is. Ryuko raised an eyebrow. Yeah, she helped you and Papa get together. Eri raised her hands in excitement. She did she? Ryuko shifted her gaze to Midoriya for a second. And boy, was he blushing up a storm and a half. He's terrible at dealing with these sorts of things, isn't he? She hid a smile. She had to admit that knowing that Midoriya was possibly more uncomfortable about this than she was helped put her mind at ease. As selfish as that thinking was, the day went on as Ryuko continued to learn and interact with her not daughter. Of course, by that point, she'd long since decided she'd make space for Eri at her agency, which also doubled as her home. She'd figure out a way to deal with all the press later. One decent public address should be enough, even though it would still likely be a mess for a while after. Though Ryuko might have to be careful about explaining Midoriya's part in all this. It might be best to avoid mentioning him if at all possible, considering what rumors might spread. Although Ryuko knew that she and Midoriya needed to talk, throughout the entire conversation, she could barely bring herself to speak to him with more than a single sentence. It was frustrating, though Midoriya was hardly any better as he continued averting his eyes from her whenever possible. I suppose I'll just have to speak with him privately. As they spoke, Ryuko thought of how she felt when this started in her office. She had wanted to believe that this was all nonsense. And part of her had hoped that by coming here, she would be able to set her mind at ease by proving that this was all nothing more than the ideas of a hyper-imaginative child. But she began to realize how improbable that was. Eri's story covered far too many fine details and concepts than any tale a simple 7-year-old should be able to make up, let alone one who had spent so much of her life trapped as an experiment. It became clearer why even Eraserhead had trouble dismissing Eri's claims. As much as Ryuko would like to believe her other, superior, self wasn't genuine. To make matters worse, as if what Ryuko knew about this other her wasn't annoying enough already, apparently, the other Ryuko had abilities she never knew she had. Yeah, Mama can breathe fire and heal super fast, and she has Storm, who warns her about danger coming and stuff. Eri gesticulated wildly. Wait, who's Storm? Ryuko couldn't help but ask. The fire breathing and healing were topics in themselves, but was this Storm supposed to be like a sidekick she had? You know, the voice in your head. She replied in a surprised manner. The voice in my head. Ryuko didn't know how to respond. Was the other Ryuko schizophrenic or something? She never had a voice that warned her about impending danger. Hell, in all her years, despite her efforts, she had never even breathed fire. In fact, for a while now, she thought she couldn't. Now presumably, Ryuko could and just never figured it out. Well, she guesses that answers her fan base's theories on the matter, who speculated for years that she had the ability and just refused to use it because it was too powerful and could endanger innocent lives. Thankfully, no one had said she couldn't because she was incompetent. Although evidently, she was. And that's not even getting into this whole extra recovery ability she apparently had. What made her different? Why was this other her so much more capable than she was? The only seemingly significant difference that separated them was that she didn't have a man in her life, and the other Ryuko did. A fact that certainly did not help with her newfound insecurities or her general mood. "Are you okay, Mama?" Eri asked, looking very concerned. "Oh, it's alright, sweetie. I was just lost in thought for a second there," she said, waving her hand. "I'm sorry. I did the same thing to Papa too," the girl said dejectedly. Izuku perked up. As I said before, Eri, it's okay. I just had a lot to consider when you told me all that. It was surprising, and I'm sure it's the same for Ryuki, your mama." Ryuko turned to look at him for a moment. I guess he had some misgivings about his other self as well. Hell, his quirk was completely different over there. "He's right, Eri. It's just a bit to take in. I'm not mad, and you did nothing wrong, okay?" she said, attempting to appease the girl. "Okay, Mama," Eri replied, looking a bit better. Aizawa moved to speak, looking up from his phone. "Alright, I'm afraid our time is almost up. You better start getting ready to go," he said flatly. "Ah, already?" Eri said, disappointment clear on her face. Ryuko placated. "I'm afraid so, Eri. But don't worry, we'll see each other again soon, okay?" Eri nodded, still somewhat glum, as she got off her chair. Everyone else moved to do the same. As the students and the girl left first, Aizawa spoke up. "So, what do you think? Give me the paperwork, and I'll sign them right now," Ryuko declared. "That easy, huh?" A slight smirk showed on Aizawa's face. "There is no way I'm leaving that girl. Not when she wants to come with me instead. I'm not living with that kind of guilt." Aizawa studied Ryuko carefully, sensing that there was more to her reasons than that, but his instincts told him that bringing it up might not be the best idea. Everyone has a past, especially heroes. Good to know she'll be in capable hands. I'll send you the forms soon. Now, excuse me, I've got assignments to grade," he said with a slight groan in his voice. "Good luck with that." She smirked. Ryuko turned and made her way back out to the main gate. On her way there, she noticed the shrub-haired teen standing out in front of the entrance giving a big hug to Eri as she soon turned to follow Mirio back into the building, passing her. "Be seeing you, Miss Ryukyu," Togata said. "You too, Togata," Ryuko said. "Bye-bye, Mama," Eri called. "Bye-bye, Eri," she replied, smiling. As they continued to leave, Ryuko realized she was now left alone with Midoriya, who looked like he was debating whether or not to run for his life. Hi," was all he said. "Well, that's better than nothing, I guess," Ryuko figured. "Hi to you too, Midoriya. How are you holding up?" she asked politely. Fine mostly. I think my hands are kinda sweaty, though." Ryuko could see the very moment he regretted that statement. Izuku proceeded to facepalm and groaned. She smiled at herself. "Oh, this poor boy. Well, someone has to tear off this band-aid." She felt herself relax towards him, almost abnormally so. Pushing that feeling to the side, she focused on their conversation. "I think you and I should talk, Midoriya. Given everything that's happened." Yeah, I'm sure. Where do we begin?" he said, shaking like a leaf. "Well, let's get to the heart of this, shall we? You and I know Eri sees us as her parents, correct?" He nodded in the affirmative. "And we also know that those other us's are in a relationship, correct?" He nodded again, this time more slowly and painfully, with a blush crawling up his face. "Good, so it isn't hard to piece together from there that Eri is going to want us to behave similarly. Izuku's head practically exploded as he flailed his arms in front of him. W8. Hold on, we can't just dash, let me finish. Not that we should. She said candidly. Izuku paused, then immediately leaned forward to bow to her. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to, it's fine dash, she shook her head as she continued. The point is that we need to draw a line here. I believe we can both agree that Eri's happiness is in our best interests, but we can't act like a couple just for her sake. It would create far too many problems, Ryuko sighed, thinking about how the media would react. Oh, of course, besides your boyfriend, probably wouldn't be thrilled about it. Thankfully, for Ryuko's sake, Izuku was still bowing. Her face took on various forms, ranging from confusion and anguish, within the sole second just before her reply. Your consideration is appreciated, Midoriya. She ground out. And now she's lied about having a boyfriend. Has she really sunk that far? Good grief, I hope Midoriya isn't the type to gossip. Shaking her head, she continued. Anyway, with that said, Midoriya. Have you decided on who your next work study is going to be for? I know that's hard to discuss, but it's important. Ryuko thought back to Night Eye. Izuku finally raised his head. I know, I haven't. A lot has been happening, you see. Izuku also thought back to Night Eye. Then I would like to make you an offer. Do your work study at my agency. Izuku was astonished. What? I mean, not that I'm complaining. This is an honor, but why? Because that's where Eri will be soon, and I imagine she won't just want to see me. She'll also want to see you often as well. This way, you get a new place for your work study, and Eri gets to see her father figure regularly. That's perfect. I accept, of course. Thank you for this opportunity. Izuku bowed again with gratitude. Don't mention it. Send me the request form as soon as you can. She smiled. Izuku made to show yet more gratitude. Really, thank you, but then he realized something. He stopped for a moment and looked around him. Panic was beginning to seep into his expression as he looked at the sky to see how dark it was. His face turned pale as he took out his phone. Oh, geez, the time. I gotta get back to the dorm before curfew. Izuku almost shrieked. Ryuko had to hold back a laugh at his antics. Not for the first time today, the pro wondered what her other self saw in this boy. Not that he was hideous or unlikable. If anything, he was rather pleasant to be around, but she didn't exactly consider him to be her type. She would have preferred a partner to be more confident than this. Was his other self radically different? Was hers? Maybe both. She guessed she'd never really know. Sorry, Miss Ryukyu, I gotta go. He said as he started to squat down for a sprint. It's fine, Midoriya. Take care. She waved a farewell. He offered a quick final wave. Okay, bye. He then rocketed forward with full cowling. A blur of green and dust was left in his wake. Ryuko wasn't prepared for the dust cloud that followed or that she only blinked, and he was just gone. She had heard about his quirk and its capabilities, but it was another thing to see it in person. While she knew he had almost single-handedly taken down Overhaul, with some assistance from Eri, she didn't exactly have the best angle to see how he did it, being stuck in a hole with other villains as she was. But now, she understands all those comparisons to All Might. The boy certainly had power and obviously had improved since breaking his body at the sports festival. Though this should probably go without saying. Considering the harrowing events the boy had been through, like the incident at the summer camp, he would have had to improve to survive. If nothing else, she had to respect him as a hero. He was clearly going places. As she was thinking this, a realization struck her. For whatever reason, she felt better than she'd been in the past several weeks, almost serene. As much as she wanted to ponder why. Something more prevalent was at the forefront of her mind. Speaking of improvements. She mused, turning to make her way home. Once she got back to her agency, she had a slight issue with fire breathing to figure out. Chapter 3, Old Dragons and New Tricks. It had been a few days since that meeting with Ryukyu. And Izuku was awake in his bed, struggling to get any sleep. Tomorrow would be his first day at the Ryukyu Hero Agency, now that Eri had finally moved in there a couple of days ago. Everything had finally been settled and arranged, with Aizawa giving himself the short end of the stick by visiting Ryukyu's agency almost every day, doing whatever possible to make the situation work. But of course, even with his visits, the situation was far from ideal, and Principal Nizu was not comfortable giving this the green light. However, a tiny solution was found to aid in all of this. With all the time spent figuring out how Eri's quirk worked, the quirk specialists found that her quirk's effect requires her skin to make contact. So, at most, Eri only needed to wear gloves, cover herself appropriately, and ensure nobody touched her skin to guarantee she didn't accidentally unmake someone. It also didn't hurt that Eri's horn, the source of her power, was still on the small side. With that said, Aizawa still didn't feel comfortable not checking up on her, just in case. So, he held to his plans to visit often. Poor Izuku, meanwhile, was all kinds of anxious. Between the awkwardness of how he was going to behave around Ryukyu, how he would be a fatherly figure to Eri, and how his last work study ended up. Izuku was borderline, actually, freaking out. He was fine at first. But once Izuku returned to the dorms after that meeting, his class wondered where he'd been. And against his better judgment, he told them about his new connection to Eri and what happened to her, leaving out the parts about Ryukyu. He decided that telling his classmates about her involvement wouldn't be great without Ryukyu's permission, especially if their concerns about what people might think of him and Ryukyu came to pass. Yet another pro-hero secret to keep under his belt. He got all kinds of responses from his class. Most were proud of him. Like Ida, who chopped his arms repeatedly, stating, "You truly are the very model of a hero, Midoriya." Or cried manly tears like Kirishima, who said, "That's so manly, bro." However, there was also Mineta, who commented, "Wow, Midoriya. You're stuck with a kid and didn't even score." This was swiftly followed by Azui's tongue smacking him clean across the face, launching him into a separate room. It might be cruel to think this, but Izuku was grateful that she did that. Amid all that fanfare, Sato even offered to bake a cake to quote Kristen, the new dad man. Leaving Izuku, flailing his arms in denial, conveying that he was not Eri's legal guardian and there was no need for the cake. To which Ishido countered. "But she calls you Papa, right?" she said with her trademark smile. At that moment, Izuku couldn't tell if the pink girl was sincerely trying to make a point or simply wanted more of Sato's cakes. Regardless, and true to form, Izuku relented. However, as time passed and a portion of Sato's sugary dad cake found its way onto his plate, the full gravity of the situation began to hit him. Sure, he wasn't Eri's father in any official capacity, but he was still playing a non-insignificant role in the upbringing of another human being. From there, his emotional stability began to go downhill. Fast forward to the present, and you'd find Izuku in his bed with his eyes bulging out of their sockets. Sweat poured down his face as he racked his brain, over and over and over again. This is fine. This is fine. Nothing terrible will happen, except that something terrible always happens. Argh. Izuku started to furiously scratch his head. Either the League is going to show up, or I'm going to humiliate myself in front of Ryukyu or be a terrible father figure to Eri. I know it. It will happen. My life is over. Knock, knock. He froze in place. What the hell was that? Izuku shot up and turned to face his porch window, and up against the glass was a familiar face. Midoriya, could you tone down the mumbling? Some of us need our beauty sleep, Aoyama called from behind the window, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Why yeah sure, I'll keep it down. Sorry. He replied. Merci, Aoyama said tiredly. He then turned and vaulted back to his own porch. Why does he never use the door? Izuku pondered with a dumb look on his face. He shook himself from his thoughts. Izuku may be terrible at doing things for his own sake. But when it was for other people, he generally succeeded. Izuku resolved to not keep being a nuisance. He emptied his mind and tried to get some shut-eye. However, a part of him was still fretting about tomorrow's events. The next day, Ryuko woke up. Being careful not to stretch too much with the now familiar weight on top of her. She looked down and smiled at the adorable bundle still resting against her. Settling Eri into the agency proved to be a lot easier than Ryuko expected it to be. She anticipated the girl being apprehensive about moving here. But surprisingly, from the moment Eri stepped in, everything amazed her. To Eri, everything was an opportunity to learn more about her alternate mother and her job as a pro, something her actual mother was still aspiring to be. Another thing the hero didn't expect was Eri's longing to sleep in her room. It was strange, but she wouldn't fight the girl about it, even if Ryuko had already prepared a separate room for her. Apparently, Eri's parents shared a bed with her all the time, news that had admittedly startled her somewhat, once again realizing how close the other her was to the other Midoriya. They'd probably marked each other as mates from the sounds of it. A blush, dusting her grimace at the thought. Speaking of Midoriya, he was due to show up today, which meant she needed to get herself and Eri ready. Eri, sweetheart, it's time to get up. She whispered. Do I have to get up? The girl asked tiredly with her eyes still closed. Well, I guess you don't have to see your papa if you don't want to. She flashed a smirk. Papa's coming. Eri cried, her eyes shooting wide open. Yep, that was today, remember? Ryuko cooed. We have to get ready. Launching herself out of bed, Eri ran to the part of the closet where her clothes were kept, slightly panicked but more excited than anything. It was still somewhat odd for Ryuko to see how much Eri was required to wear, even as she slept, although she understood the necessity. The more surprising thing was how easy it was to convince Eri to go along with all this. Most kids would have thrown a tantrum, but Eri seemed almost subservient at times. They thought that often disturbed Ryuko, considering what the cause of that might be. Relax, Eri. We still have plenty of time. Ryuko beamed. Getting herself out of bed, Ryuko proceeded to assist Eri in getting ready while getting ready herself. Dressing a child and reminding them to brush their teeth was still new to Ryuko, but she didn't mind it. Far from it, she adored it. This was something new and fresh in her life while still helping someone. It made her feel like she had purpose again and not like something hollow given to her via a title and rank she didn't deserve. Later that day, Izuku was taking deep breaths in front of Ryukyu's agency, an enormous building that put every other agency he'd been to so far to shame. He paced slightly, muttering up a storm as he went through what must have been his 100th time rehearsing how he would interact with them. He pondered. I really should have brought that paper bag with me. He groaned. He was there all alone, no Mirio, no nobody. He had hoped that he would have at least had Azui and Uraraka here since they were both doing their work study with Ryukyu. However, they were on a bit of a break. Apparently, they still wanted time to recover from the events of the Hasaikai raid. Honestly, he couldn't blame them. If the situation was different, he might be on a break himself. In fact, they seemed to share that sentiment. Azui and Uraraka were surprised he was getting back into it so soon. So Izuku had just made something up, stating something to the effect of being eager, continuing to avoid the whole thing about Eri seeing Ryukyu as her mom. Thankfully, for his anxiety, the girls accepted his explanation, encouraging and reassuring Izuku that he would be okay on his own. You're going to be fine. Ryukyu's a great hero to study under. Uraraka had cheered. Yeah, and I'm sure you'll do great. Azui had croaked. He really wished his paranoia would let him believe them. At this point, the passers-by on the street gave Izuku some concerned looks. Even an officer was now going out of his way to approach him. A squid tentacle-like mustache adorned his face. Are you okay? The officer asked, with a deep concern on his face that showed even through his long dangling squid stache. Oh, yes, I'm okay. I was just thinking a lot. Izuku wasn't sure how to respond, caught so off guard. I see, well, it's just you've been thinking a lot, in that same spot for a while now, and I'm gonna be honest, you're kinda scaring people. The officer said uncomfortably. Izuku dropped his head. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll stop. Good, just look, I don't know what you're dealing with, but it seems rough. I know life can be hard at times, kid, but I hope you understand that there are people here who care about you. He continued. Izuku's eyes widened at that last part. What? Surprised, he barely managed a response. Yeah, okay, so, there's no reason to jump into rash decisions you can never take back. You've got a full life ahead of you, kid, a life to really make something of yourself. Right, Izuku was starting to get uncomfortable. The officer placed a hand on his shoulder. Izuku tensed in response, still bewildered by what was happening. So, take care of yourself, okay? I know you'll be someone great, so hang in there. Even if it feels like no one else believes in you, just remember. The officer flicked a thumb at himself. This guy right here does. The officer smiled genuine and wide, patting the boy one last time on the shoulder, and walked away. Izuku just blinked. Was I really that bad? He deadpanned. Izuku turned back to face the entrance to the agency, realizing that now was as good a time as ever to head inside, at least before anyone else got a little too personal for comfort. Taking in one last deep breath, he lumbered inside. This was so much easier when Mirio was with him the first time he went to an agency like this. It didn't help that this agency was much bigger than Night Eyes. Unsurprisingly, since it belonged to one of the top, however, for all the grandeur outside, the interior was more spectacular. To make a comparison, while Night Eye's agency was like a glorified office building, Ryukyu's was akin to a high-class hotel, crowned with marbled floors and walls that matched with rich and luxurious carpeting. Izuku could only assume that this was the power of popularity, sponsorship deals, and merchandise at work. Standing in the entrance hall, Izuku was left wondering what he was supposed to do now. Well, he would have been left wondering if someone hadn't called out to him. Excuse me, do you have an appointment? Looking to his right, Izuku noticed the platinum-skinned, brown-haired lady sitting behind the desk, which he could only assume served as the reception. He must be really out of it to have not seen her there, to begin with. Attempting to not look like a nervous wreck, he responded, why yeah, I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm here for my work study. Ah, I see. We've been expecting you. Take the elevator to the 5th floor, walk to the end of the hall, and that will bring you to Ryukyu's office. The woman said in the stock, happy, professional tone that the boy assumed all receptionists had. Noting the hint of an accent in her voice. Right, thank you. With that, he turned to reach the elevator. After waiting for the elevator and entering, Izuku heard someone cry out. Wait, hold the elevator. He didn't have time to check who it was before he pushed the button to keep the elevator door open, and the person in question practically leapt inside. Thanks, saved me some trouble there. Getting a better look at the person, he realized who it was. It's no problem, Hado. The boy stuttered. Nijire Hado leaned back against the wall of the elevator and pouted slightly. It's Nijire-chan or just Nijire. I'm in costume right now, can't you tell? She paused for a moment as realization struck her. Wait, aren't you, Deku? What are you doing here? Are you here to see Ryukyu or little Eri? The girl fired out. Sorry for starters. And yes, I am Deku. And I guess I'm here to see them both, Ryukyu for my work study and Eri for complicated reasons. He said quietly. Izuku could never quite get used to how this girl talked or how, in your face, she got when asking questions. Nijire looked to be recalling something and smiled. Oh, I see. You know, when Eri showed up here a while ago, I was so surprised. But then I was like more surprised after what Ryukyu told me. She said, placing a single finger on her chin. Wait, so you know? Izuku asked, surprised. Well, a little, I think, but clearly, you must know more. So, what's up with you being Eri's dad? Did you and Ryukyu get married? Then did you adopt Eri, and then did you immediately divorce afterward? And then Ryukyu got custody? Nijire questioned. Much to Izuku's dismay, her face got closer and closer with each passing word. No. I mean, I'm 16. Had Nijire-chan. I can't get married to Ryukyu. He shrieked. Oh. Right. Laws, those are things, whelp dash, ding. The elevator opened before she finished. Oh, well. Never mind, I gotta go see the boss. Catch you later, Deku. She then flew out into the hallway, disappearing down the corridor turns. Izuku really needed to figure out how to deal with girls. He'd gotten better since meeting Uraraka, but he still had a long way to go. He made his way out into the hallway and walked to Ryukyu's personal office, sighing to himself as he did so. I can't believe she told Hado. He mused. Izuku made a mental note to himself to ask Ryukyu about this later. Maybe she wasn't as concerned about this as he assumed, or she simply trusted Hado that much. He wasn't upset, of course. It was more Ryukyu's secret than his, after all. The hallway was just as fancy as the rest of the building. It gave off a strong sense of class, and that realization was not helping Izuku's nerves. Reaching the end of the long, winding hall, past all the various rooms, and seeing a large pair of double doors, the boy assumed he had reached his destination. What he heard coming from inside only confirmed his suspicions. Auntie Nijire. Make me fly too. He could hear from the other side. Easy there, Eri. The last thing we need is you falling and bumping your head just before Midoriya shows up. He heard Ryukyu say. Oh, come on, boss, I'm a great flyer. I could totally levitate while carrying her. He could easily imagine the pout Nijire was making. Izuku gritted his teeth. Come on, just go inside. You've stalled long enough. Izuku firmly grabbed onto the door handle and opened the door with a purpose. That he wasn't entirely sure he ever had and entered. The office was lavishly ornate and decorated in many ways, giving a sense of class and professionalism. Fine art, trophies, and other valuables dressed the walls and tables, with a good selection of books on multiple large, embellished bookshelves on either side of the room. Ryukyu was behind a large, expensive-looking wooden desk, seated in a deluxe office chair, in front of a large window overlooking the city. Nijire, on the other hand, was standing with Eri in her arms. Papa. Eri squealed as she wrestled from Nijire's grasp and raced towards him. Thankfully, Izuku was now used to being called this better than the first time anyway. And opened his arms to catch the girl running towards him. How've you been, Eri? Izuku asked as friendly and confidently as he could. Great. She yelled, clearly ecstatic to be in the presence of both her parents again. Speaking of which, Izuku turned to face Ryukyu, releasing his grip on the girl. Unfortunately, he was a shivering mess. Greetings Ryukyu, Izuku stopped, took a deep breath, and continued. I've come to do my work study. He said as he bowed. Ryukyu looked almost impressed that he could finish that without stuttering. Well, I would have appreciated it if you knocked first dash, the color drained from his face. DMN it. But, what matters is that you're here now. Izuku barely held back a sigh of relief. Small victories, Izuku. Small victories. Ryukyu then moved to stand from her chair. It's about time you arrived. We were starting to get concerned. What happened? Ryukyu inquired, her posture formal and almost regal. It's hard to explain. I guess I lost track of time practicing. He responded as professionally as he feasibly could. Practicing what exactly? Izuku didn't need to look to know the judgment she was giving him right now, though having to make eye contact was not helping. This was quickly devolving into what his first meeting with Night Eye ended up being. Are all bosses this judgmental? He wondered as sweat began to drip from his neck. Of course, pondering this was not helping Izuku's current predicament. But thankfully, someone else did. Papa was practicing his quirk, right? Papa always does that. Eri exclaimed happily. Izuku decided to run with it. That's true, that is something I do a lot. Alright. He mumbled out the not lie he was telling. Is that so? Ryukyu said inquisitively. I hope you will keep better track of the time from now on, Midoriya. Izuku nodded vigorously. I will. I'm sorry for making you wait. Eri pulled on Izuku's arm. Don't worry, Papa. Mama always got unhappy when Papa paid attention to something more than her. The girl said, seemingly innocently. Izuku had to do a double take, flustered with how he was supposed to respond. Ryukyu, however, had no such issue. Eri, she said firmly, giving a stern and knowing look at the child. Eri continued to innocently smile as she was given a thumbs up by Nijire. Ryukyu just sighed, turning back to Izuku. Well, let's just get down to business, shall we? I trust you brought your hero suit with you. Izuku nodded firmly, raising the suitcase in his right hand. I'm all set. Good. Eri, why don't you spend some time with your father and show him where the changing rooms are? She asked sweetly. Yes, Mama. She turned to face Izuku. This way, Papa. She said, grabbing onto Izuku's hand and pulling him away. Izuku's head nearly spun with the suddenness of it all, but he wasn't going to complain. After all, he missed seeing Eri, although he still felt somewhat guilty over Mirio. Izuku had effectively taken his place in Eri's life and then some. In many ways, Mirio was effectively her big brother. Now she no longer has that connection with him. Not that their relationship had gone sour, but with how this Eri was saved very differently from the girl he knew, Mirio was no longer one of those iconic figures that went against Overhaul himself to save her. For this, Eri, those iconic figures were himself and Ryukyu. It was like he'd stolen someone's kid from them through some weird law loophole shenanigans, and there was nothing they could do about it. But Izuku didn't need this on top of everything else right now, so he tried to strike up a conversation with his not daughter partway down the hall. So, have you been enjoying it here, Eri? Your gloves aren't bothering you too much, I hope. He shifted his gaze to her. Yeah, the gloves aren't great, but they look nice. Mama and Auntie Nijire say they look cool and pretty on me. She waved her gloved hands in the air. Izuku smiled. They do look good on you, Eri. If nothing else, UA hadn't skimped on her. Members of the support class had chipped in to provide special designer gloves, set to look almost however she wanted them to. In the end, Eri went with a red and green pattern design, reminiscent of the colors used by Ryukyu and Izuku in their hero costumes. And it's really nice here, everything's so big and awesome, and Nijire and Mama let me fly with them sometimes. She said enthusiastically. I'm glad to hear it, Eri. To be honest, I was worried you'd have trouble adjusting since this is all new to you. He replied. Ha. But this place is just like Hydra's place. She said with adorable frankness. Izuku paused, the name not familiar to him at all. Hydras. Who's that? Eri's jaw dropped. You don't know Hydras. But she's awesome and one of your favorite heroes. She can turn into a Hydra, that big dragon with 3 heads. She cried out. The boy was quite bewildered by her response. He had never heard of a hero who could turn into a Hydra. There was no way he would ever miss out on hearing about a quirk as incredible as that. How would it even work? What happens when her head splits into 3 or more potentially? Izuku refocused on the conversation. Eri, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I've never heard of anyone having a quirk like that before, and I've never heard the name Hydrus either. He said solemnly. There's no Hydrus, she said despondently. Eri looked at the ground. She wasn't sad, just shocked. She didn't know how to process what she had just been told. Izuku could imagine what she must be thinking. If this Hydrus didn't exist here, then who else didn't? It was one thing for the people she knew to be different, but another for them to not be here, PRD. Izuku decided the best course of action was to change the subject. So, how about the other people here? Are they nice? Izuku asked clumsily. Eri looked up. Oh, the front desk lady's nice. Oh yeah, I met her. She does seem nice. Anyone else? Eri tilted her head. There isn't anyone else. Izuku's eyes bulged. There isn't anyone else. Eri shrugged. Nope. He knew many heroes tended to leave Ryukyu's employ after a while, starting their own agencies. After all, the heroes she preferred to hire were of the more ambitious persuasion. But the idea that no one except interns and the receptionist was here was crazy to him. But this building is huge. Surely other people work here. Eri shrugged harder. Mama says heroes come and go, and she likes to keep to herself mostly. Izuku was stumped. Surely Ryukyu would want more people for her agency to run things, right? And yet, apparently, she kept this whole place basically to herself. That struck him as very odd. But, why the big building? Izuku pondered more to himself than anyone else. Eri scrunched her face, thinking hard. Mama just likes it that way. Mama seems to really like expensive things. Izuku raised an eyebrow at that. I see. Silence filled the space between them once more as Izuku looked for something else to talk about, desperately trying to not make things awkward. So which floor are the change rooms on anyway? He asked suddenly. Eri struck a power pose. All of them. All. He deadpanned. Yeah, there's one on every floor. Mama says it makes things convenient. She tried. Good try, Eri. It's pronounced convenient. He smiled. She blushed. I knew that. I was just testing you, Papa. The girl pouted slightly, slouching her pose. Izuku stifled a laugh as a realization struck him. Coughing nervously into his hand and raising his index into the air, he declared, You know, Eri. There's nothing wrong with not knowing something. It just means you have a chance to learn something new. Izuku figured now was as good a time as any to, as Ashido put it, get his dad on. Thinking about it now, maybe asking his classmates for parenting advice might not have been the best idea, no matter how desperate he was over the past few days. He recalled Kachan's offhand remark back at the dorms when he overheard. Just raise her to death, DKU. It's not hard. Honestly, Izuku still wasn't sure how to feel about that statement. Eri's pout changed to a strange stare at him. Yeah. Okay, Papa. She nodded uncertainly. Izuku hid his disappointment. At least that wasn't the worst response he could have gotten. Raising a kid, let alone raising them to death, was, in fact, quite hard. From there, Eri continued to describe to Izuku the layout of the building. Everything from the change rooms' built-in showers to the toilets built right next door to said change rooms. Of course, Eri didn't fail to mention all the easy ways to get food and the robots that kept the whole place clean and functioning. Through it all, Izuku learned to appreciate Ryukyu's longing for function and convenience while having a good sense of aesthetics, even if those aesthetics seemed slightly excessive here and there. Especially considering this building was practically all for herself. Then again, she was a dragon. Maybe that had something to do with it. Ryukyu's office. So, now that they're gone, how have things been going, boss?" Nijire asked ecstatically. "You mean with my training, correct?" Ryuko sighed. "Of course, have you made any improvements? Maybe like a puff of smoke or something?" she asked in her typical all-over-the-place mannerisms. Ryuko sighed again. No, I haven't. Not even smoke. It's almost like no matter what I try, I'm not getting anywhere. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but to have made no progress at all, it's just frustrating. I guess that means the fire image training didn't work out then. I stared at a candle for what felt like an hour. I even tried putting my face close to it to get a better feel for the heat. Well, all that means is we try more things until we get somewhere, right? Nijire asked with a cheer in her hands. Ryuko sighed once more. Right, you're right. The Dragoon hero's mind went over all the attempts she's made thus far, including her time back in high school when she first tried this. She wasn't as discouraged back then, probably because now she knew it was possible and was failing miserably at it. Eventually, her mind settled back to the day she came back from meeting with Eri -5 days ago. Ryuko had made her way into the lower levels of her agency, where her specialized training room was housed. A place built to handle her and her quirk. Ryuko was eager to improve, not just for the novelty, though she had to admit that was part of it. She had been searching so long for something to drive herself towards, something tangible to make her feel like she deserved to be a top hero once more. If nothing else, learning of her other self had given her that. Gaining entirely new abilities was a significant step towards self-improvement, and were better to start than with the power she had wanted for years. Breathing fire. Plus, it was something she assumed would be easier to figure out. Compared to accelerated healing and a disembodied voice, anyway. Staying in her hero outfit, Ryuko began to focus. She'd dealt with fire plenty as a hero, saving people from burning buildings. She remembered the heat. The smoke. The form. She took a deep breath, applying all her recollections. She then breathed out and nothing, not even fumes. She transformed, scales appearing on her body as she grew several sizes, her face sharpening into a lizard-like form. She tried once more and failed. Well, it would have been asking too much for this to work the first time. Where her old self might have just gone back to the drawing board, she persevered. Now that she knew that it was possible, all she had to do was apply herself. She wasn't giving up. But what started out as minutes quickly turned to hours as Ryuko was lying on her back, staring up at the ceiling, breathing heavily, her voice hoarse and dry. She had tried breathing exercises and failed. Then she tried meditation. Trying to focus her thoughts on breathing fire and failed. She tried compressing her stomach to force it out of her and failed. She tried yelling at the top of her lungs and failed again. Nothing was working. Nothing Ryuko tried came close. She even attempted to take out her phone to find information on Endeavor. Where rumors said, the man emitted flames by imagining the hottest thing he could think of, and still, that gave her squat. Just as she was about to throw in the towel, she heard a ding from the elevator. "Ryukyu, are you in here?" she heard Nijire call. "Yeah, I'm down here." Nijire walked over and held in a gasp. "What are you doing down there? You look half dead." "Are you half dead?" "I certainly feel that way." Ryuko groaned. "Let's get you some water. Be back in a sec," she said, running over to the sectioned-off kitchen the training room had. "Shouldn't you be back at UA?" Ryuko barely spoke while sitting up. Nijire soon returned with a glass, and Ryuko gratefully took it from her. "I was just finishing off some work. I'm sure the teachers'll understand." She smiled while giving a thumbs up. But then turned grave. "Now, seriously. What were you doing down here?" Ryuko doubted they would relent with an explanation like that. If anything, Nijire would probably be lectured later. After a long sip of water, she debated for a moment. She never liked talking to people about her problems or her shortcomings. But right now, she knew if she told Nijire nothing, she would no doubt hound her for information later. Nijire had a way of annoying people into talking. Ryuko answered quietly. I'll tell you if you promise not to tell anyone. Nijire looked confused. Okay, sure. I was trying to breathe fire, she said curtly. Nijire's eyes widened significantly. Wait, trying? You mean you can't right now? Did you forget how? The intern was very confused. No, I didn't forget Nijire. I never knew in the first place, Ryuko pouted. What? But you dash, Ryuko almost scowled. Nijire, have you ever actually seen me breathe fire before? I audible gasp. Yeah wait, what? But so many people think that you can. Nijire continued, exasperated. Ryuko was still caught on audible gasp. Hold on, why did you? She closed her mouth before finishing. She learned a while ago that questioning Nijire's odd eccentricities wouldn't get her anywhere. So, she shifted gears. Look, I let them think that, she ground out. Nijire went silent and looked down in contemplation. She then raised her head. Your secret's safe with me. I won't tell anybody, she said assuredly. Ryuko sighed in relief. Thank you, Nijire. I think I need to take a break for a while, though. Not making a lot of headway here, she said as she got up to leave. Wait, let me help you, Nijire called, reaching out. Ryuko stopped dead. Excuse me. I know your quirk is very different from mine, but two heads are better than one, right? I can do some research to see if I can find anything that'll help. She smiled. Ryuko's eyes broadened. She didn't really have anything, particularly against Nijire, but she wouldn't exactly call them close either. At least no closer than she had been with anyone else who did their work study with her. Are you sure? Of course, what kind of hero would I be if I didn't help? Nijire said frankly. Ryuko didn't like putting her problems on other people's shoulders. To her, that was about as heroic as going into Tartarus, finding the worst villain there, then walking up to their cell and saying, here, have a lockpick. Ryuko is supposed to figure this out herself. She should be able to, but with how things were going, did her pride really matter that much? Nijire might miraculously come up with a breakthrough that she hadn't, and it's not like she'd be demanding a lot from the girl. After some consideration, Ryuko realized she might actually be desperate enough to want help for once. Ryuko smiled. Alright, I'll take any help you can offer, Nijire. The present, it had been 5 days since then, and they had researched all kinds of weird techniques that were supposed to help with fire-related quirks, but in the end, they had gotten nowhere. And if Ryuko was being honest, Nijire's suggestions were starting to get on her nerves as they had become increasingly absurd. Nijire had come in today with several new ideas. Presumably, the internet has no end to its ever-expansive list of horrible suggestions. And all of them, she was certain, would do something terrible to her health. How was eating live fire ants supposed to end well? Where the hell was she even supposed to get those? She grumbled. Just as she thought that, the door to her office opened, revealing Eri, followed by Midoriya, who was now adorned in his hero costume. We're back, Mama, Eri called. Reporting for duty, Ryukyu. Izuku stood stiffly, like a soldier at attention. Ryuko was glad for the distraction. Ah, good. We'll head out for patrol immediately. Alria, I mean, of course, Izuku said, responding like someone with a metal pole strapped to their back. It'll be just you and me, Midoriya. You need to learn the route, after all. Nijire, take care of Eri while we're gone, she said in her most professional tone. Yes, ma'am. Nijire saluted. Aw, can't I come, Mama? Eri whined. Ryuko kneeled down to her and smiled wistfully. Sorry, sweetie, but we can't risk you getting hurt. Part of being a hero means we have to confront villains, okay? Okay, Eri said dejectedly. Ryuko, struck by guilt, frowned a little. Uncle Aizawa will be stopping by to visit, so stay out of trouble, alright? We'll be back soon, I promise. Eri simply nodded back. She felt remorseful, but Ryuko needed out. She'd been cooped up training in her agency for longer than she wanted to admit. At this point, any excuse to go outside and not deal with more crazy training ideas was a good excuse. Alright, Midoriya, let's go. She turned to leave. Right, let's go. He said, walking like a stiff wooden plank, pretending to be a person. Ryuko glanced at him and shook her head. What was she going to do with this kid? Chapter 4, Fire is where the heart is. Taking the elevator down to the lobby, Ryuko and Izuku were greeted by the cranky visage of Aizawa. Ah, perfect timing, Aizawa. Ryuko greeted. How so? The teacher glanced between them. We are going out on patrol. And guess who needs a babysitter now? She smirked. Aizawa sighed. Please tell me you weren't about to leave Eri without proper supervision. Nijire is currently watching over her and as I said, proper supervision. He grumbled. Ryuko frowned. As I was going to say, I knew you would be coming. If nothing else, you're punctual. He sighed again. Fine, just don't take too long. Aizawa stopped for a moment and then looked as if he recalled something. By the way, how's the search for Eri's home tutor going? Ryuko deflated a bit at that. I'm still looking. Finding a tutor who suits Eri's specific circumstances is proving to be quite difficult, unsurprisingly. Being a full-time hero made it difficult for Ryuko to school Eri herself. And while Aizawa visited, it wasn't long enough to teach her properly. On top of that, given Eri's prior hostile life, she was far behind in her schooling. While she may have been 7 years old, Eri's reading and writing skills were close to those of a child still in kindergarten. With concerns surrounding her quirk, public schooling was out of the question. Formerly, the staff at UA would have handled this on their campus. But as things were, compromises needed to be made. Unfortunately, people who could deal with Eri's quirk and were also good teachers didn't grow on trees. Thankfully, as Ryuko had recently learned, this new Eri was quite different. The old Eri was terrified of new people and almost always needed someone she knew nearby. This Eri was far more outgoing. She was still awkward here and there, but she had so much more energy and vibrance, as though she had already undergone much of the healing she needed to be whole again. If nothing else, this simplified dealing with her quirk stress and management, specifically when introducing her to new people, like a potential new tutor. Aizawa looked almost guilty. I'll keep an eye out for a tutor when I can. I would be tutoring her myself if I had the time. Ryuko waved her hand. Don't say that. You're already doing plenty by visiting as much as you do. You have an entire class of students to look out for every day, on top of everything else being a teacher entails. I appreciate it, but it does little to make me feel better. I'll see you two around. The two sides moved past one another. The patrolling pair made their way to the entrance as the teacher walked to the elevator. Oh, and Midoriya, Aizawa called. Izuku turned back almost robotically. A faint grin made its way onto Aizawa's face. Do try to stay out of trouble this time, he said as the doors slid closed. Izuku could do nothing but chuckle wistfully at himself. I'll try, he mumbled. The sunlight bore down on the pair as they stepped onto the street. Midoriya was still stiff and awkward as hell. The elevator ride down was muted and unpleasant if Ryuko was being honest. She didn't blame him, of course. She knew what he'd been through, being part of the infamous Class 1A, the fact that he was still strung together was quite frankly miraculous as far as she was concerned. But, with that being said, Ryuko couldn't allow this to continue, they had a job to do, and he needed to shape up. She turned to face him and gave a pressing but sympathetic look. Alright, Midoriya. What's up? You can't go on patrol looking like that. Heroes need to instill confidence and reassurance in those around them. And right now, you're giving me anything but that. Izuku perked up, putting his hand behind his head, scratching anxiously. I am sorry, it's just this is only the second time I've been on patrol, and the first time was kinda, he trailed off. Only the second. But you've been through internships and your work study with Night Eye. Correct. Ryukyu asked, utterly bewildered. Yeah, my internship didn't involve going out on patrol. The hero I was with focused on getting me better with my quirk. We were going to do more, but things got cut short with the incident with the hero killer Dash. That's right, he's also one of the kids who got attacked by Stain. Ryukyu barely kept a straight face as Izuku's turned grave. As for Night Eye, I only went on one patrol with Mir, Lemillion, and that's where I first met Overhaul and Eri. After that, I was pulled from patrol so we wouldn't arouse suspicion from the Hasaikai. Izuku finished and looked almost exhausted from the explanation. It wasn't hard for her to tell that he was holding back the details of that confrontation with Overhaul. Ryuko couldn't keep that straight face anymore as her expression softened. You've really been through a lot, haven't you? Izuku, realizing he may have just unloaded too much baggage on the woman, waved his hands in front of his face. It's not all bad. I mean, I'm still living my dream. I get to be taught by All Might at UA. And now I'm doing a work study with Ryukyu, the Dragoon hero. Dash, as he said that, his mental dam broke. All the pent-up anxiety he'd built up was starting to overflow. Izuku's face became dire as he grew more resolute, a question burning on his tongue that he had to ask. But I know I'm supposed to smile in the face of adversity. It's just I'm struggling with how I'm supposed to do that when I know that, at any moment, something terrible could happen. Some disaster could happen, or some villains could show up, and I might not be strong enough to stop it. Izuku sighed before he continued. I never realized how hard it was to keep smiling. Izuku was an open book, now bearing what had been eating at him for months for someone to see, not aware enough to question whether or not Ryukyu was even the right person to ask. I guess what I want to ask here is, how do you do it? Izuku looked directly at Ryukyu. Ryuko stared back at the boy, thinking. This was not an easy question to answer. Every hero had to deal with this to some extent, and she was no exception. But despite her years of experience, she still didn't have a concrete answer as much as she wished she did as of late. The only thing I can say for sure, Midoriya, is that it all comes with experience. To be completely honest, finding the balance between being prepared for the worst and rolling with the punches is one of the more subtle yet challenging aspects of being a hero. Everyone has their own way of coping with it. Ryuko looked up slightly, pondering her following words. For me, I just try to focus on what's in front of me. She knew it wasn't a great response, especially for encouragement. If it wasn't working for her, it probably wouldn't for Midoriya. Ryuko's brow furrowed, trying to think of something more tangible to give. But look, try not to worry about that for now. I promise I will do anything I can to ensure nothing crazy happens. So relax. You're in the hands of a pro and one of the top 10. She smiled brightly, internally groaning at that last part. Izuku's cheeks reddened. One part of his mind was digesting what he had been told, the other was trying to figure out how to respond. He wasn't given much, but it was enough reassurance to latch onto. Something stable until he found his own way. He bowed with renewed strength. Thank you, Ryukyu. I'm sorry about that, by the way. That was a lot to put on you. I'll try my hardest to smile more. It's alright, Midoriya. You've been through much for your age. My high school years weren't anywhere near as hectic as yours. You have my deepest sympathies. She chuckled. Thank you again, and thank you for being so patient with me. He bowed again. She sighed with a smile. As I said, it's all right, enough with the bowing. Now let's turn to a lighter topic, shall we? What's your hero name again? Izuku raised his head suddenly. Oh, right. It's Deku. He stammered out. Ryukyu turned and started walking down the street, indicating for him to follow. Putting on the best smile he could muster, Deku followed next to Ryukyu. Right, Deku. I've been meaning to ask, what inspired that name exactly? Though I suppose my first question should be, what does it mean? She asked, placing a finger on her cheek. Again, he scratched his head, having a decent idea of how this conversation would go. It means useless. It's a nickname I got from when I was young. Izuku decided to not involve anyone else in this conversation. Ryukyu's eyes went wide. He was also bullied as a child. What's next? Is he also an orphan? She felt a surprisingly vast sensation of anger at this thought as many questions crossed her mind. But she could only ask one at a time, unfortunately. You call yourself useless. Part of her wanted to ask, who would call him that? But she wasn't sure that was a question he was willing to answer, considering how he paused a moment ago. Izuku smiled a bit at her deadpan response. Yeah, it's kinda like a joke, where when I become a hero who is anything but useless, it'll be ironic. Maybe I'll even get some people to smile about it. He said with a big grin on his face. Ryukyu couldn't help but smile at that. Well, it seems to be working, so I suppose I can't argue. Ryuko's face changed to a frown. But I have to ask. Why did you have a nickname like that in the first place? I don't want to bring up any bad memories, so you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But I am curious. She urged, still feeling that odd ping of anger inside herself. Izuku knew this was coming. Thankfully, by this point, he had straightened out his story and was ready to tell the partially false but technically true story he had. You see, when I turned 4, I was diagnosed quirkless. And I know that sounds weird, especially with how I have quirk now, but it's true. It wasn't until much later that I got my quirk after training myself ridiculously hard for the UA entrance exam. He stated with practiced accuracy. If Ryukyu's eyes got any broader, her eyebrows would have started to leave her forehead. So, the training awakened your quirk. Ryuko had never heard of any case like this in her entire life. Although quirks were a strange force that no one seemed to fully comprehend. Not even the experts. Izuku continued. More or less. It turns out that if I had gotten my quirk any earlier, it might have killed me. So, my body had to adapt first. He smiled. With how he worded it, he technically wasn't lying, or at least enough so that his conscience would let it slip under the radar. Ryuko, on the other hand, was making her best attempt to respond to all this. Wow, I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like. But I guess it worked out in the end, right? She gave a cautious smile. And I guess it was for the best that it did show up later. If your quirk awakened when you were 4, you might have died, as you said. If the sports festival was anything to go by. She grimaced as her eyes turned to his scared hands. Izuku looked at his right hand and clenched it into a fist as he thought back to his fight with Todoroki. Yeah, the sports festival wasn't my finest moment, but I don't regret it. Well, good. She said with sincerity. But you're right. It wasn't the most exceptional showing, although it did make for an exciting match with the young Todoroki. And if nothing else, you have gotten better if that dust cloud you kicked in my face the other day was any indication. She smirked. It was now Izuku's turn for his eyes to go wide. He bowed. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for that to. Ryukyu could barely stifle her giggles. I was joking, Deku. In all seriousness, though, I am impressed. That level of growth in just a few short months is remarkable. To go from having a quirk that hurts yourself more than your opponent, to moving at ultra-high speeds while taking down a Yakuza boss. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little jealous. She smiled. Izuku blushed furiously at the praise. I am not that great. If it wasn't for Mirio, Ieri, and even Nightai, I probably wouldn't have been able to beat him. He barely stuttered out. Ryuko's expression suddenly turned solemn as she recalled what happened to Night Eye. Something inside of herself was collapsing and giving way. She couldn't stop herself. For what it's worth, Midoriya. I'm sorry we didn't get there sooner. I failed both you, Togata, and Night Eye. Izuku's gaze shot up to Ryukyu, who was staring at the ground, her hands balled into fists. What do you mean? You were there. You helped like everyone else. He said, confused and upset at her words. But I could have been there sooner. Sure, there was a powerful villain in the way, but there were 4 of us. Had I just thought about it more, I could have sent one of the others in for support, maybe Nijire. Or if I didn't pull any punches and just took down that villain quicker, things might have turned out differently. Ryuko's gaze hardened like the concrete she stared at. Night Eye might still be alive, and Togata would have his quirk. Ryuko was shivering as she struggled to hold herself to her own standards of maintaining a heroic appearance in public. Why did she start talking about this? Why now? She knew this wasn't going to end well. Was it because Midoriya had opened up to her? Was holding this in really getting to her that bad? Just as she was swallowing the lump in her throat, Midoriya stood in front of her. It's not your fault, Ryukyu. You couldn't have known what we were dealing with or what had happened. And you know what, I'm glad you showed up. When you did. If not for you I'd probably be dead right now, and Eri I don't even want to think about what might have happened. Izuku shuddered at the thought. He looked back to Ryukyu, her expression only beginning to soften. So he pressed on. Please, don't blame yourself. You're too great a hero to actually deserve that. Me and Eri both owe you our lives. Izuku bowed his head. He had no doubt what would have happened if his fight with Overhaul went on the way it was. Not once did the boy think that he would be grateful to witness a dragon spontaneously falling through a ceiling, yet here he was. So, thank you, Ryukyu. You're my hero. Ryuko was at a loss for words. The guilt over Night Eye was still present, but it had lessened significantly. She didn't realize how badly she needed to hear that. The reassurance, the gratitude. Ryuko still had a long way to go, but Midoriya had given her a much-needed boost of self-confidence. Though, it startled her just how much his words affected her. Regaining composure, she smiled. Thank you, Midoriya. I think I needed that. She cleared her throat. It's no problem. I guess we're both pretty bad at smiling, huh? He joked. Despite her immense shame at her actions, she laughed. I guess so. Come on, we should get going before people start staring and asking questions. Izuku quivered at that. Yeah, the police around here are pretty intense about that. I see you've met Officer Squidly. She chuckled. Officer Squidly. Wait, that's his name. Izuku said, gobsmacked. Yep, Inca Squidly. He's very passionate about his job. She smiled stiffly. You can say that again. He said dryly. Later, the patrol itself continued, rather uneventfully, at least regarding villains. Despite the rise in crime since All Might's retirement, it seems few had the gall to mess around on the turf of one of the top at least for now. Izuku was glad. It was nice to be on a patrol where all he had to worry about was waving to random citizens and saying hi to small children. While awkward at it, he did well, according to Ryukyu, but maybe she was just offering encouragement. He was a bit self-conscious that he had yet to demonstrate any combat prowess or use of his quirk. But, boy, were there a lot of children. It felt like every 5 to 10-year-old in a 100 kilometers radius heard that Ryukyu was out today, and all of them wanted an airborne joy ride. Izuku stood some distance away in the park they had arrived at as he looked on in concerned awe. Is this normal? Ryukyu, currently swarmed head to toe by kids, gave a resigned grin. Yep, pretty much. A toddler was hanging from her arm as the child's mother was frantically apologizing while trying to pry the child off. "I'm so sorry, Ryukyu. Honey, please, please let go," the mother cried. Izuku smiled uncomfortably in response as he heard someone call out next to him. "Hey! Mama, look, it's that weird broccoli boy from before who keeps talking to himself." A small boy pointed at him. Izuku turned to face the child while nursing his injured pride. "You know, it's rude to call people a weird broccoli boy." The young lad turned to face Izuku, realizing he was being spoken to. And what's your quirk?" The young boy seemingly disregarded what Izuku said and spoke obnoxiously. "You're a hero, right?" The greenette shuffled awkwardly. It makes me stronger and faster." It's called superpower." Izuku was suddenly reminded of preschool. "It's called superpower." "That's lame, you're lame. I'm leaving." With that, the boy turned and walked back to his mother. Yup, just like preschool, Izuku sighed. He could only be glad that at least Eri wasn't like that. Just then, Izuku felt a tap on his shoulder. "Ready to go, Deku?" Ryukyu asked. "Oh, you're done already?" he said, surprised. She shrugged. "I know my way around, kids." Another chubby youngster called out, running up to them. Ryukyu, can you breathe fire for us?" The pro flinched a little in response. "I'm sorry, I can't. It'd be too dangerous and might get me suspended as a hero." Please. No one ever gets to see you breathe fire." The boy pleaded with the most pitiful puppy dog eyes he had. "You don't want you and your friends getting hurt, do you?" she offered placatingly. "No," the boy said dejectedly. "Here, you can have this instead." Reaching behind the boy's ear like a magician, she pulled something out and showed it to him. It was a small holographic projector, but Izuku quickly realized it was a powerful, high-end model. "What's in it?" the small boy asked. "Why don't you push the button and see?" She smiled. The youngster pushed the button on the projector, and immediately there was a large plume of light followed by an enormous show of flames of all shapes and colors. The scale of it was immense. The sky around the park was engulfed by the projection. Izuku realized that there wasn't only fire in the projection. There were also dragons of all sorts. Chinese long dragons, European mountain dragons, even hydras and sea dragons. They were all there. It was like watching fireworks coordinated by dragons as they breathed flames through the air. Everyone in the park was understandably in awe. Even Izuku's jaw dropped a bit at what was happening. He snapped his gaze back to Ryukyu, seeing the satisfied smile on her face, contrasting beautifully with the colorful flames. If he was being honest, she looked gorgeous. "Wait, no, I can't think about her that way. That's a line we can't cross. And besides, she already has a boyfriend." Izuku began to recite something to himself in his mind. "I'm not valiant. I don't share a quirk with her. I'm just Deku." He then forced his eyes away from her. Ryuko, on the other hand, was having a great time as a performer. "Pretty neat, isn't it?" she said to the chubby boy, whose jaw was still hanging open. "And I can keep it?" the boy asked eagerly. "Yep, just make sure you share it with your friends, okay?" The boy nodded and rushed back to the other children, eager to tell them what Ryukyu had just given him, as Izuku gestured from Ryukyu's side. "You sure you can just give that away? It looked pretty expensive," he asked, slightly concerned. "It's a bit pricey, but it's nothing I can't afford." She smirked. Not for the first time today, Izuku was forced to recognize the power that was ample funding from sponsorship and merchandise. "If you're sure, I never realized how much money top heroes had," he said, staring with slight awe. Ryuko paused for a moment. "It's not just what I get from being a hero. I also dabble a bit." "How so?" Midoriya asked, legitimately curious. Ryuko scrunched her face a bit. I work a bit with shareholding. You invest in shares. Yeah, call it a hobby. She said uncomfortably. Why did I tell him that? I never just tell people about that. Why do I keep telling him things? Midoriya must have noticed her mood as he replied. Oh. Sorry, I asked. I didn't mean to dash. Ryuko frowned. Okay, you're going to need to stop apologizing so much. I know I'm your boss, but I'm not going to just transform and bite your head off. Izuku visibly flinched at the imagery. Right, I'll do that. Good, now let's go. We should do as much patrol as we can before our break. She smiled, turning to leave. Yes, ma'am. He replied, following her. Izuku turned back for a moment and noticed the kids still playing with the projector, each having their turn to push the button. The kid gifted the item was smiling, no doubt bragging about how Ryukyu gave it to him. You handled that really well back there. He said, smiling. I wasn't always this good. The first time I got swarmed was a mess. She shook her head at the memory. But still, you not only avoided using your quirk irresponsibly. You also managed to make everyone smile. He replied excitedly. I suppose I did, but frankly, I cheated. Anyone with that projector could have pulled that off. It probably would have been better in some ways to have actually breathed fire instead. I can't say I agree. As the son of a fire breather, I was taught from a young age how dangerous and out of hand a fire can get. Izuku smiled faintly, feeling a sad sense of nostalgia. I still remember when I was a kid I once asked my dad to show me his quirk, only to be told that he couldn't because he might burn the apartment down. Izuku said, seemingly jovial. Ryuko's eyes widened for what felt like the dozenth time that day. Your father can breathe fire. She barely kept her jaw from hanging open. Yeah, that's his quirk, fire breath. He smiled awkwardly. Was this it? Was this the key? Ryuko wondered. Was her other self able to figure out fire breathing because of this? Because Midoriya had a father who could breathe fire and knew how to help her. Ryuko started to debate with herself. On the one hand, if she asked for his help, she might be able to breathe fire in no time. On the other hand, that would require telling him the truth about her ineptitude. And after nearly breaking down in front of him, her already wounded pride was not ready to take another beating. That and Ryuko had enough of accepting aid from high school students for a while. So, she found a middle ground in the form of misdirection. Interesting. You know, I like learning about quirks similar to my own. I'm curious, how did your father manage to start emitting fire? She mentally patted herself on the back. Izuku pet his head slightly in astonishment. Ryukyu likes to study other people's quirks, like me. Once again, internalizing his frustration towards Valiant, he responded. How? Well, at first, he wasn't very good at it, or so he told me. But he started improving when he added ultra-spicy food to his diet. This time Ryuko couldn't stop her jaw from hanging. Spicy food. Izuku gave an embarrassed grin, placing a hand on the back of his head. Yeah, it's a bit weird. But, it helped my dad get the sensation he needed to use his quirk, and after a while, he could do it all by himself. That can't be it, can it? The secret all along was she needed really spicy food. Wasn't that one of Nijire's crazy ideas? What about you, Ryukyu? Izuku asked. She stammered out of her thoughts. Huh. You know, how did you start breathing fire? Ryukyu was flustered, and she barely responded in time. Oh, you see, I just transformed one day, and it just happened. No difficulty at all. She proceeded to scream internally. Wow, I guess some people are just talented. But I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by one of the top 10. He said sincerely. Yep. She said through smiling grit teeth. Why did she do these things? Right now, more than anything, Ryuko was resisting the urge. She needed a distraction. Checking the time on her phone, she noticed now would be a good time for a midday snack. She looked around to survey for a place to eat, and her eyes rested on something that, on any other day, she would have probably said no to. It was a curry joint. The sign read, Burly Dom's Curry Crush, get you some spice. The sign's design was almost as strange as the text, having a cartoon, muscular man flexing with a plate of curry in each hand. She clenched her hand into a fist. This was a great opportunity, and she was not passing it up. Deku, perhaps we should get something to eat. Why don't we head over there? She pointed at the restaurant. Oh, a curry place. Yeah, sure. I guess all fire breathers like spicy food. He joked. Ryuko just kept facing forward, not looking at him. Haha yeah. She said, wanting nothing more than to die. Making their way into the restaurant, they were both struck by the powerful spicy aroma that wafted through the air. Ryuko was never big on spicy seasoning, and the odor alone was already inciting her eyes to water. She barely held back her tears as she plodded with Deku over to the counter. I'll pay for our food, she said. Midoriya raised his hands. That's not necessary. Deku, I'm your superior. And unlike you, I have an actual salary. You're not paying. It would reflect poorly on me to make an intern do that. Midoriya nodded his head with poverty-stricken shame. Alright, then. Ryuko smiled. Don't look so disappointed. Consider this a thank you for earlier. What transpired with their heart-to-heart on the streets still irked her a bit. Midoriya smiled softly. I was just doing what was right, but thank you. As they stepped up to the counter, Ryuko made sure she knew what she desired from the menu beforehand, like a decent person. The restaurant itself was, thankfully, mostly empty. Having to deal with potential fans was not really something Ryuko wanted to deal with right now. She'd had her fill of that from the park earlier. Noting the obviously Endeavor-themed dish, she asked, I'll have the Hellflame Ultra Spice Curry, please. Izuku's eyes grew wide, and the man at the counter, who she assumed was Burly Dom, whistled. The man didn't look that burly, honestly. Maybe that was just a name. Wow, we've got a brave soul here, but I guess I should expect no less from the Dragoon hero herself. Taking her order, then Deku's, and then accepting payment, he made his way into the kitchen. Ryukyu could only smile stiffly at the man's comment. Moving to take their seats not too far from the counter, they began to converse. It's been a while since I've been to a curry place. I'm amazed you can handle that Endeavor dish. Just looking at the picture made my eyes burn. He praised. It's no big deal. How bad could it be? Ryukyu shrugged. They didn't have to wait long for their meal. But after glancing at the food, Ryuko wished she had more time to mentally prepare herself. She thought her eyes were burning before. But the moment the dish was set down, Ryuko's eyes almost felt like they were set ablaze. It was like the sun had descended upon her. Izuku stared at the dish in astonishment as it almost seemed to glow with heat, like magma. He looked back at Ryukyu with concern. Are you sure about this? Yeah, I'll be fine. She replied with no degree of certainty. Enjoy your meal. The man, who may or may not have been Dom, said, smirking slightly at her as he walked back to the counter. Ryukyu glared faintly at the man's back, then turned to face her meal again. She could do this. This was just food. She'd dealt with way worse than this before. She was going to be just fine. Taking the spoon to her right, she scooped up some of her meal, taking it slowly and carefully to her mouth, noting how it almost seemed to crackle and pop. The Ryukyu we knew died that day emotionally, of course. No amount of therapy could ever hope to mend the scarring shame that followed what was about to transpire the moment the curry touched her tongue, everything burned. Her face, her eyes, her mouth, her skin and bones. Her very concept of reality mirrored the surface of the sun. Like every facet and fiber of her being was melting or charring. She might have been delirious, but through her suffering, she could swear she heard her grandmother and the rest of her kin howling out in pain as the same burning sensation racked their beings. Instant regret wasn't just an inaccurate term at this point, instant regret was outright offensive to Ryuko's sensibilities and despair. Putting this food in her mouth didn't just make her regret doing so. It made her regret her very existence and everything else that had led to this moment. But she was a fighter. She wouldn't be beaten by a curry dish, of all things. Balling her hands into fists, she forced herself to swallow the food. Izuku looked incredibly worried. "Are you okay, Ryukyu?" Attempting to speak and reassure the borderline panicked boy, she immediately regretted that too, reminded the hard way why you shouldn't chat while trying to swallow food. I cough choke wheeze. Making the vital mistake that things couldn't get any worse, the curry went down the wrong chute, as the volcanic heat was now spreading to her lungs. Oh God! Not like this! She cried internally. Ah! Quick, we need a glass of water. Izuku yelled out. If the curry didn't kill her, she knew the utter shame of it all would. It seemed today was all about humiliating herself in front of Midoriya. Add the possibility of the media finding out about this, and death seemed almost preferable. Possibly Dom rushed over with a glass in hand, and Ryukyu quickly took it and downed the entire thing in a single gulp. Are you okay? Izuku was still very concerned. I cough yeah, splutter yeah, I'm fine. She said as she shakily gave a thumbs up. Saved it. From Izuku's perspective, he saw a bright red swollen face with puffy lips and traces of tears in the heroine's eyes. If he didn't know any better, he could swear that Ryukyu was put through the ringer by a ruthless villain. Good, Izuku said, doing his best to not injure her pride further. Suffice it to say, they had both decided from that point that asking for the food to be made portable so they could move on was probably for the best. The potential curry crusher who brought the food tried to apologize for the mess. But they assured him he wasn't to blame. Deciding to call it quits for today and heading back to the agency seemed the best idea. They got their meals boxed and bagged and left. It would appear Dom's curry crush had crushed her spirit. Get you some spice, indeed. She glowered. Later, as terrible as today had been for her, Ryuko had to admit she was at least happy with Deku's overall performance. He got along with people well and seemed mostly capable in public appearances once he broke out of his shell. Although she would have liked to see how he handles himself in a fight up close. But that could come later. Ryuko knew from the raid that he must be capable. It was nice to not have to deal with a hero in training who was either obnoxious with pride or a little psychotic. Ryuko has gotten a few non-UA applicants like that in the last few years. She'd had her doubts. But the boy proved himself to be a dependable, if emotionally questionable, individual. Although Ryuko had to admit that she was alarmingly at ease with being open about herself with him. She had never fallen apart like that in front of someone before. All she could think was that she really needed to get a handle on herself. It was wrong of any hero to put a junior through something like that. Another thing of note was her anger at the thought of him being bullied. Sure, she had felt anger on someone's behalf before, what hero hadn't? But this felt so much more intense than it should have. What she could attribute this all to, she wasn't quite sure. However, as much as she tried to focus on the positives, what stuck out to Ryuko the most was that she had made no progress with her abilities, despite what she had just suffered through, her sore tongue serving as a harsh reminder. That feeling was only cemented further as she saw her agency drawing closer, barely keeping a scowl off her face. Both stepping back into Ryuko's lobby, they were greeted by the receptionist, who was obviously doing her best to not react to her boss's ghastly appearance. Making their way into the elevator. The ride-up started out quiet. A thought occurred to Izuku as he realized this was a unique opportunity to ask a more private question. Ryukyu. Can I ask something? She turned to face him with a quirked brow. Sure, what is it? Why did you tell Nijire-chan about my situation with you and Eri? Not that it's wrong, I'm just surprised. It went without saying that Izuku's involvement with Eri would be downplayed. As Ryukyu pointed out before, any rumors stemming from Eri's seeing Izuku and Ryuko as her parents could be terrible, potentially jeopardizing Ryukyu's career as a pro hero. Even Izuku's could be at risk. A story of a potential scandal involving one of the top 10 having a child with a high schooler would no doubt spread like wildfire. That made it all the more surprising to him that Nijire knew about it. He assumed Ryukyu would hide it more. He would have asked earlier had he not been a complete nervous mess at the time. Ryuko sighed. I didn't mean to tell her. She started asking questions about Eri and me. And Eri, being the sweet, innocent girl she is, was more honest than I was prepared for. It was my mistake for not prepping her better. Izuku nodded. Don't blame yourself. We're both still new to this. Mistakes were bound to happen. I appreciate the sentiment, Midoriya. But I'm the adult here. It's my responsibility to make sure things like this don't happen. While I've made sure we don't have to worry about Nijire, we're lucky Eri didn't speak to someone more willing to blab to the media. She said tiredly. Izuku shifted a little uncomfortably. Do we have a plan in case the media does find out? Ryuko offered a faint reassuring smile. Don't worry. Just leave that to me. I already have a statement planned out just in case your part in all this goes public. You won't have to do anything. Remember, this isn't the West. The media isn't allowed to just invade your life in this country. Izuku breathed in and nodded. Yeah, you're right. I was just worried about what it might do to your career with all the rumors that would go around. Ryuko was surprised. My career. What about you? Aren't you more worried about that? He shrugged. I mean, yeah. But there's so much more at stake for you. She smiled. Thanks for your concern, Midoriya, but I'll be fine when you've been a pro for as long as I have. You develop all sorts of countermeasures. Izuku grinned back. I guess I have a lot to learn from you. Considering today, Midoriya. I think we both have a lot to learn. She sighed. I'm guessing I shouldn't mention the curry to anyone. Never. Ever. She pouted mockingly. The conversation became quiet once more after that, with Izuku attempting to not chuckle too hard at Ryukyu's response, and though she was hiding it, there was now a faint smile gracing Ryuko's lips. Things were still slightly uncomfortable between them since they were last in the elevator. But at least now, there was an understanding between them. The silence was not entirely due to awkwardness, but rather to respect for the other despite a traumatizing curry-related incident. When they reached the 5th floor, the doors opened. Nijire, Eri, and Aizawa were waiting to greet them. Took you long enough. Aizawa Welcome back, boss. Oh, and Deku, Nijire said. Did Mama and Papa enjoy their date? Eri smiled. Innocently. Izuku looked like he was about to freak out, but Ryukyu swooped in before he could say something they would both regret. Eri, we were on patrol. There was no date. Suyer, Mama. Eri just continued to smile. Ryukyu just sighed as Eri noticed something on her mother's face. Wait, Mama, what happened to you? You look all beat up. The girl asked, very worried. Everyone except Izuku was put on edge as they also noticed the damage. Aizawa frowned deeply, wondering who or what could do this to the dragoon hero. While Nijire covered her mouth with both hands, shocked by her employer's visage. I'm okay, Eri. I just had a bad run-in with something distasteful. She said uncomfortably. Was it a villain? Eri cried. No, sweetie. It was Curry. She groaned out. Curry. The girl mouthed. Aizawa, relaxing, just grumbled. And that's my cue to leave. Stepping into the neighboring elevator to Ryuko's and Izuku's, the teacher said his farewells. Take care, and don't do anything reckless. He stared pointedly at Izuku. Everyone waved in response while Izuku smiled uncomfortably. Bye, Uncle Aizawa, Eri called. The moment the doors closed, Nijire spoke up. So, you tried the curry trick. How did it go? Nijire chimed in excitedly. The moment the words left her mouth, Ryuko glared at her. Nijire realized her mistake, and she covered her mouth with her hands. Wait, curry trick? Izuku asked. Ryuko's face was in her hands as she replied as calmly as she could. It's not important, Midoriya. Now excuse me, I'm going down to the training room. She stood up straight and walked back into the elevator. Can I come too, Mama? Eri pleaded. Ryuko sighed a little, still remorseful from before. Alright, Eri. You can come too. The girl skipped happily into the elevator. Just as the doors were about to close, Izuku saw something in Ryukyu's eyes as pieces began to click together in his mind from the day's events. Perhaps he had all his experience with Kacchan to thank for this, but he could tell she was putting up a front. And behind that front was someone troubled, upset, and needed help. If there was one thing Izuku was absolutely terrible at, it was ignoring someone who needed help. Before the doors slid closed, Izuku rushed into the elevator, almost like his life depended on it. Ryuko's eyebrows raised significantly when the boy entered. Papa wants to come too. Eri asked excitedly. Ryuko looked quizzically at the boy. Is that correct, Midoriya? Izuku barely had time to register what he had just done. He and his stupid hero legs just love doing their own thing. Yeah, I do. He said, blushing slightly. Ryukyu still had that same look on her face. You know, you could have just asked for me to hold open the door, right? You didn't need to rush in like that. Izuku's blush only deepened. I didn't really stop to think. Ryuko reflected for a moment. She had hoped to avoid interacting with him further, just in case he had managed to put two and two together. Yet, part of her seemed to relax in the young man's presence. The expression on his face only served to put her more at ease. It was strange. It took significantly more effort to be frustrated with him than it was not to be. No matter how much of a doofus he could be at times. Ryuko shook her head with a smile. Well, let's make the most of this, shall we? Why yeah, Izuku stuttered. At that very moment, Eri took their hands into each of her own, smiling happily now that she was finally with those she saw as her parents again. The stand-in guardians couldn't help but smile back at the girl between them. Right now, as strange as all of this was, they were both glad to be here.